Okay, cool. Well, again, thanks so much for being here. And we met through the Dr. Shafali Conscious Parenting, and I think we did your manifestation together, but we figured that out later, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But I always love to have people just kind of share a little bit about themselves, so the listeners can learn more about you and kind of understand where you're coming from.
All right. So, like you said, I am a follower, a student of Dr. Shafali, and I guess before that, I was an educator. And my background is in education. My degrees are in early childhood, elementary education, and I did that for quite a while in public school, charter school. Um, I even had like my own home-based daycare for young
Oh,
children
great.
2 to 4.
Oh, cool.
It was like nature-based, and I think why I jumped around so much is because I never really found my home,
Yeah.
whatever reason that was for, right? I think maybe I hadn't had children yet either,
Mm,
and so some of my own inner work wasn't there yet
yeah.
for that too.
Yeah.
But so I do have 2 children. I have a 14-year-old son, 17-year-old daughter, and I discovered Dr. Shafali when my son, who was at the time around 7, looked me in the eye and said, "You're trying to control me. Stop."
Mm.
And I said, "Okay."
When he was
I
7.
uh-huh. And that was after like a year of constant headbutting and battling and conflict between the two of us in who was
Mhm.
going to control who.
Yeah.
And luckily at that point I could hear him and I could stop and say, "Okay, I'm the adult here. I'm the one that
Mhm.
has to find a new way."
Yeah.
And that's how I came to Dr. Shafali's work and fell in love and took almost every single course she offered, read all the books. And as soon as she offered the Coaching Institute, I jumped in there and became a conscious parent coach
Oh,
certified
great.
by Dr. Shafali. And
Oh,
so
great.
that's what I'm doing now. I retired from teaching and I'm working on building that.
Awesome. That is so great. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because of the fact that you are an educator and you're a mom and you're a conscious parent coach. So it's like the combination of everything, because part of the vision and part of the matter is that we think about these things separately, like, oh, I'm a parent or I'm a teacher or I'm a coach, but it's like, it's all integrated. And so one of my dreams is that we start to think about this as all as one integrated whole, like parents, teachers, community, like we're all raising our kids together. And so, but I love that you have these different lenses and perspectives to talk about education. And I know you had wanted to share kind of the 4 pillars or the 4 foundation.
So,
So I thought I'd give you a chance to do that, but I want to let people know that we will be talking about, because many people have asked me, like, what is unschooling? What is radical schooling? What is distance learning? What is homeschooling? What's a public charter? What's an independent school? What's a private charter? So much alphabet, whatever you want to call them, like different terms, different names for all these things. And so we'll get to that. But I really wanted to hear your foundational pillars, because when you messaged me, I was like, yes, that's where we should start. I like her.
thank you. And the reason I brought this up is because I find that this topic and the state we're in right now of uncertainty
Yeah.
and could really bring up a lot of triggers, a lot of fears, right? And
Yes.
if we're in that state, just physically, we cannot think problem solving
Yes.
creatively
Yes.
outside of the back. We can't imagine, right? And so when you said we're a conversation on imagining a new type of schooling or education, like we can't even imagine, right?
Right.
Until we can calm ourselves, right? And
Absolutely.
so that's what I wanted to kind of address first and give 4 different ideas that parents can use to kind of find their bearings, find their
Yes.
foundation to build off. So the
Excellent.
first one is nothing is set in stone. Whatever you choose to do
Mm.
is not set in stone. It can always change, just like the
Yep.
school system's going to change, I'm sure,
Yeah.
at some point, right? They're starting off
Yep.
virtual, they're going to shift at some point. So change
Absolutely.
is coming, whether you plan for it or
Yep.
not. So don't think that your decision now is forever.
Yes.
It's just for this moment in time. You are
Yes.
just experimenting and you're going to try it. And if it doesn't work, you pivot. So
And
I
that's
think,
great advice before COVID, because I know when I would
yeah,
talk to people about thinking about schools, they would get really nervous. Like, I put them in this kindergarten, they have to be there all the way. And really, you get this kind of thing that everything's so permanent. But if we don't realize how things are so impermanent now,
mm,
like you said, the schools are going to be changing multiple times throughout the year. So that's beautiful. So the first thing is really about everything, nothing set in stone.
nothing is set in stone. Exactly. I mean, I had to pull out my daughter from her first pre-K 4 program. I also had to, she was in another school, alternative school that went to 8th grade, 7th grade. It all fell apart, had to pull her out. So
Yep.
I've been there. I understand,
Yeah.
but you can do it. It's
Yeah.
not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And when I put my kids in, they chose their high schools, I told them exactly that. This is not a
Yeah.
4-year commitment.
Yes.
This might not even be a 1-year commitment.
Right.
This is just a commitment right now. Let's try it and see. That's it. So remembering that as parents, because we
Yes.
we stress ourselves out.
Yeah.
So number 2, I think, is remembering, and they're all kind of intertwined, but
Yeah.
is staying in the now.
Yes.
Remembering that it's not about your child's future. It's about right now. It's about, what does your child need right now, given their emotional state, their psychological state, their strengths and weaknesses, their interests. I mean, so many different things.
Yep.
What does your child need right now? And don't let yourself get into that story of, I'm ruining their life.
Yep.
Like, stay here. I've been there,
Yes.
done that, right?
Yes.
But stay here, stay in the now, stay in this moment.
Because as parents, we're professionals at, if I enroll them in this karate class right now, I'm going to ruin their whole entire life, and they're never going to want to be in a group again, and then they're never going to have any friends, and then they're going to drop out of high school, and they're not going to go to college. And it's the jungle of the mind. The mind will take you into the jungle. So
and
yes, that's such a big one. Thank you.
So really remembering to just stay in the now, and set little miniature goals for yourself. Like, today's goal could just be listening to this conversation to learn about different options. That's it.
Yeah.
Small, tiny, little, simple goals working towards where you want to be. That's it.
Yep.
The next one I would say is remembering that as parents, we are only here or in charge necessarily of creating the environment. We don't have to do it all. We just have to create the environment, right? Find the support. And that environment might look completely different for everybody, and even for children within the same family.
Yep.
And honor that, honor where you're at, and find the support. If homeschooling sounds like a great option, but if you just can't pull it off, and you're going to be at home with your child yelling and just freaking out all day and putting stress on them and stressing yourself, then that's not the right fit for you, right? So you're just about creating an environment where they can thrive and they can focus on their interests, their strengths, even their weaknesses, right? We don't have, but creating that environment with the support that you both need. It's not all about the child here. We have to remember our needs as adults and parents and caregivers also.
Yes.
It's got to be a win-win.
Yes.
And then the fourth one is our mindset, right? Are we doing things out of fear? Are we doing things out of conditioning, limiting beliefs? Like, really sit with what comes up for you. This is what this time is calling of us. It's calling us to question everything, and it's uncomfortable. But that's where the growth is, right? That's the juicy stuff. That's what we're learning how to do with grace. And so noticing what beliefs you do have around education, how that should look.
Right.
And can we shift that to learning and expand our view of what learning means? And we can only do that when we're feeling safe, when we're feeling calm, when we're breathing through it, and becoming aware of our mindset and shifting it, right? So that we can then stay expansive and truly imagine a completely different way.
Yeah.
if that's what we choose.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I love your conscious. Well, first of all, I can tell you're a great coach because this is good advice in a one-to-one session. But
Thank you.
I love that you're bringing in the conscious parenting perspective because it's so much more than just about what school you're choosing, but or what path you're choosing, but more about like before you have to go through those, really think about those four things. And one of my friends was just telling me that he was a Division I football player and he wanted his son to really play football. So they switched him to this really nice private school where he was going to play football. And then his son's like, I don't want to play football. And he had to go back within and realize, so then he got really angry. The father got really angry. And then the son was like, I don't want to play football. And then it took the father some time to realize that it was actually about him and his own expectations, his own conditioning around my son's supposed to be a football player like me. And I was like, were you choosing that school for you or were you choosing that school for your son? Because, and it's easy to kind of mix those two. So I really, really love that. Going back to the mindset, thinking about, we've all been so conditioned around school because we've all been in school. So, in some places maybe you're not as conditioned as much about different things, but if you've been in school, I mean, at some point, I think everyone's been in school, even if they didn't stay for that long, they were in school at some point. So there's just a lot of conditioning around the way it should be. And I think the other part around the fear is that we're in this mass hysteria right now with like, should the schools open, should they close? Should we do this? Should we do that? And I really felt like homeschooling was going to really start to pick up. I just had this really deep intuition about that about 2 years ago. I had no idea that it was actually millions of children being forced to be at home schooling. But yeah, so I think on that note of like really breaking down the conditioning, I'd love to kind of go through some of these different terms that people hear. And I want to start with the most radical or the most outside of the paradigm we live in. So, and then we'll maybe end with like more within the paradigm, closer to the paradigm that we live in. Like we'll go in that order. I don't know if this is actually even the right order, but that's the way my brain's operating right now. So let's start with unschooling. So, because I've heard you speak in other interviews about how as a teacher and a conscious parenting coach, you kind of had some views about unschooling. And then when you did some more research, you had some different views. So I'd just love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, so I didn't know much about unschooling, and I had my own conditioning and my own beliefs about it without really inquiring.
Yeah.
And then I read Radical Unschooling by Dana Martin, and I also heard her speak a few times and met her and had some conversations with her. So I think that also helped. I'll say the book is an easy read. I read it in 3 days. It is, I recommend it for everyone, even if you're not even considering it, because it really helps you to question every aspect of parenting, every aspect of how we create an environment for our children, right? And so you don't have, and it gives you the continuum, right? You don't have to go this way, but just be aware that there's this much possibility and we might be here, right? So my interpretation from reading that book is that it takes deep, deep attunement to your child and to their interests and a connection with them that guides you as a caregiver as to how to create the environment for them. Right? So for example, she gives examples in the book of when her children were younger, and she's got 4 kids. So she did this with 4 kids. And I think one was, she mentions one was on the spectrum. So when one of her children was into Legos, she subscribed him to a Lego magazine, and that is how she introduced the written word.
Oh, nice.
Right? She bought like Lego pans to bake cakes with, and that's how they did math, right? So a lot of people like myself think that unschooling means do nothing.
Right.
Just let them do whatever they want all day.
Yeah.
And that's not what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's about being so attuned to what they are interested in that you're creating the opportunities for them to learn. And it also asks us to question what is learning, right?
Mm,
Is learning only reading a textbook and
right.
answering questions at the end of the chapter?
Hmm.
Is it only like acting like a sponge, ingesting whatever an adult full of
Right.
knowledge is imparting, right?
Between the times of 8 and 3, it only
Right.
happens between 8 and 3.
Yeah, 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 exactly. In a specific, space and right. So, or is learning involved in everything that we
Yeah.
do? Everything, you
Hmm.
know? So that's what I loved. I loved the connection that it called for. I heard someone even yesterday talking about unschooling and saying that they didn't and this is radical unschooling, that they didn't like this because it doesn't challenge children to do things that they don't want to do, and
Mm,
that's something that we have to do as part of society at times.
yeah.
But here's what I thought about that. When I read the book, there were things, for example, she allows, and this is really radical, she
Yeah.
allows her children to curse.
Yeah.
But her children know that if they're going to grandma's house or they have a new family coming over or any family
Yeah.
coming over, that they would have conversations with the mom and you think that they'll be okay with cursing? And she'd be like, probably not. So let's just, tone
Yeah.
it down. That's kind of, you know, being part of a society and
Yeah.
being like
Yeah.
respecting other
Yeah.
people's needs, right? Same
Absolutely.
thing with, she would say, we're going to grandma's house to have dinner. Just remember that grandma has her own expectations about what
Right.
table manners look
Different
like.
environment. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
right, and let's respect that we're in her home.
Yep.
To me, that's teaching
Absolutely.
how to be in a society around other people, right? So I don't think we necessarily have to make our kids do things that they don't want to do to teach them that lesson, I
Yeah.
guess is where I'm
Yeah.
getting at, right?
Yeah.
um and so I just found so many beautiful examples like those, right, where it opens your mind to doing it a different way.
Yes. And what you're bringing, what you're reminding me is when I opened my school that's now, and it's going into its, well, just actually the teachers got back today. So in our 4th year, and it's currently a transitional kindergarten through 4th grade here in California in Sacramento. And when I was planning the school, I had 2 years to plan for it. Like just that was my full-time job. I was able to fundraise and get my salaries like beautiful. And so I actually planned for it for like more than 2 years, but I had 2 years of full-time job, right? And when I was doing the research, I kept finding myself like really connected to the unschooling parents. But then I was like, wait, I can't do that. Like, I'm starting a school. And as I've gone through the process with my own kids, so my kids are now, my son's going into 4th grade, and my daughter's going into the second. So they spent a couple years at the school. And I realized that I was kind of building a school for the best version of like a brick and mortar, publicly funded school with standards and all that. But then I'm like still itching for like, oh, like this is still so kind of just the same conditioning with just a little twist. And as you're talking, I'm remembering just all the articles I would read about why I thought unschooling was so cool. And then at that point, this is about 5 years ago, I had people coming out of the woodwork from my past, from everywhere. Like my family's in England, they were reaching out to me and saying like, my dad's side of the family, like, what, oh, what's going on here? Like, we want to do unschooling. And my friends that I hadn't seen from elementary school for, how many years, and they were all coming and asking me all these questions. And I, just as you were talking right now, I realized that I kind of suppressed that because I felt like, well, I have to create a school that people will come to. And when I started to go out and ask parents, I would say to them, oh, it's going to be kind of like Montessori. And and they would be like, oh, okay. It's like, it's kind of like a Waldorf and a Montessori. In this area, there's actually a few of those here. So they kind of like, oh, okay. It's like, but it's not. But at least they could understand that. But when I started to tell them, we're going to really let the kids self-direct, and we're going to let the kids, I really subscribe to the Reggio Emilia philosophy, which is similar to what you just talked about, where it's like, you let the kids kind of guide you in your curriculum. And the parents were totally freaked out because they were like, wait, they're just going to be running around like crazy and there's going to be no discipline and no boundaries. And I'm like, no. So when you're talking about unschooling, it reminds me that we're so conditioned in this one paradigm about what school should look like. We don't even know where to start. And then what happens is I would meet with parents that were really excited. And then through the process of getting their feedback, obviously, because you're building a school for the community, it's not just doing it by yourself. I started to change so many things because I realized they wanted this and they wanted that and they wanted this. And by the time the school opened, I was like, this is maybe 10% of what I had actually dreamed of, of the school that I really wanted, because the parents actually diluted it so much because they're coming from a place of fear and no judgment. That's just where we are, because the social paradigm is creating a place where you're trying to get your kids to, get into the rat race. And by doing unschooling, you're actually having to go against the current. And that's really scary as a parent. And today, is it as scary to, like, now that it's all on the table, right? It's all, the table's upside down.
We're home, we're working from home. We have, again, though, it's not for everybody, right? It takes a commitment. It takes a lot of connection and with your child, a lot of conversation. It takes a lot of work in finding mutual respect. And I really see how, if you've been in an authoritarian paradigm with your child, it's going to take time for them to trust
for sure.
That you're not going to jump in and try to control them again. But the time is here. The time is now to really rethink it. And I sort of always was the black sheep of the family to a certain extent, right?
Yep,
and I put my kids in a Waldorf school, and everybody was like, what are you talking about? What is this?
They don't teach reading until third grade or whatever, right? That's always the first thing I get about Waldorf.
And now they're in a public high school, and they're doing fine. And one of the things she says is her kids always had the choice. They had the choice to go to school or not. It's not like she made them do unschooling either. She gave them the choice. And I know that one of the things that comes up for parents too is the whole issue with socialization. And how is my child going to learn to socialize if they're doing virtual and I hear that and I understand that, but also remember that if you're in a family, just being in a family gives you the opportunity to have social relations and to teach that, right? We don't realize how much we actually teach through just our living, through just what we're modeling, right? But we don't consider that teaching. We're constantly teaching our children, constantly. Sometimes things we don't want to teach them, right? But it still happens because we're human, and that's what they're going to pick up on. So shifting that idea of I have to hire somebody to teach because this is academic stuff, this is important stuff, right? Why do we give more weight to the academic stuff and subjects than to learning how to be in a relationship with mutual respect with a sibling, with a parent, right? Especially now in COVID, I know that a lot of people are scared with the social contact. Okay, well, find one family to quarantine with. One family. That's all it takes. Because I get it. At the end of the day, it's going to be healthier and easier for your child to have interaction with another child and for you to have interaction with another parent. It's again, like I was saying earlier, a win-win, right? It's for both of you. It's meeting both of your needs. So I think that is important, but it doesn't have to be a class of 20. It doesn't have to be a huge group, right? It's still socialization. Trust me, they're gonna have time in their life to socialize in a big group.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So relaxing around that fear too, and realizing that you're already teaching, whether you believe it or not.
Oh my gosh, the parent is the teacher. So just to clarify, because I know this, but just for others, so it sounds like unschooling is actually some version of homeschooling. Like there's not actual buildings that are like unschools. Like, is it actually you're homeschooling because the parents are leading the charge kind of deal?
Right. So my understanding of unschooling is that you're not bringing school home, which is what a lot of homeschoolers end up doing, right? So
Yes.
you are choosing not to do schooling
Right.
in the traditional way of schooling.
Right.
You are choosing to educate and recognize that every experience has a learning built
Right.
into it.
Right.
And so you're just creating that environment in your home. But yes,
Got
you
it.
could do it with small groups,
Right.
and you could it only really takes the subject matter really only takes, like I've heard you even say, an hour or two.
Hour or two. Yeah.
And then you go out and you know have time at a park, go to
Yeah.
a museum, right? Do
Yeah.
things that interest you, and if you can bring another family along,
Yeah.
great. I feel it really takes the pressure off. You're not using a curriculum.
Right.
So in some ways it puts on more pressure, I think, for depending on your
Right.
temperament, and in some ways it releases some of the pressure, right? Because it releases the pressure of having to meet certain goals at a certain
Right.
time, right? But sometimes to some parents, like the parent that I used to be, type A, OCD,
Yeah.
need for control. That's really scary,
Yeah.
to not have something to be able to follow and to know
Yeah.
that you're doing it right.
Well, and to not to follow the Joneses, right? So then you feel like something's wrong. I mean, my wife and I, just by having our kids go to my charter school instead of the one in the neighborhood, it's like people look at us like we have two heads, because we live in a nice neighborhood with a nice school, and we're going like over to like the not nice neighborhood, because that's where I wanted to start my school, with like the kids that really didn't have as the greatest, the greatest schools or whatever. And so the parents in our neighborhood are like, we don't. And so just the small thing of not doing the normal mainstream, oh, but everybody moves to this neighborhood because of the schools. Wait, and you're sending your kid to a charter school on the other side of the tracks? Like, what is that? Like, they're so confused. They have no idea. And I'm like, well, I started it. They're like, oh, okay. So then they think I just did it because I started it. I'm like, no, but that's actually our values. But I guess what I'm getting at is that you have to go against the peer pressure of the current. And that's really hard. But that said, it seems from the people I talk to that are doing some version of homeschooling or unschooling, and now I'm getting it, like there's unschooling, which is really saying like you're not going to go with the curriculum because I know some people will homeschool, they'll do it through like an independent study charter school, which still has all the Common Core standards, or they will, hire teachers or tutors, and they'll basically just do the same version of the kind of traditional factory model school in a much better environment at home, and like, and no judgment, like they can do that in a way that might work really well, but they're not choosing to actually unschool. They're choosing to kind of just follow the mainstream schooling in a less mainstream way at home, kind of.
Which has its benefits too, because like I was saying earlier, you can get it done in an hour or two, and then let your kid have the rest of the day to do what they choose, and to have other activities, and if they're passionate about something, to have time to really explore those passions and live in them, right? And it's just less stressful.
Right.
So
have to go, you're not going as far against the current, right? You're kind of going a little off the river instead of like against it.
Right. And so there, like, for example, when I pulled out my daughter from her schooling in 7th grade going into 8th grade, there was only 1 year left. She's like, Mom, I'm not going to go to a brand new school and start to try and make friends when I'm going to have to go to a new high school anyway. At that moment, I had my home-based daycare also. So I was home anyway.
Yeah.
And so we chose for her to do Florida virtual school.
Oh,
so she did her 4 core classes online with my support when needed. And I registered her as a homeschooler. But here's the thing, there's 2 ways to register, at least in the state of Florida, as a homeschooler. You can register as a regular homeschooler that does all the standardized testing, has to submit a portfolio, all that. Or I registered her under the umbrella of unschooling. And through a specific person that I found out here. And then all I had to do was submit attendance.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. And then did you get any kind of funding, or does the charter school get funding, or how does that work? Because I know in some states you can get funding through the charter school, and like there's a great program in Orange County in Southern California where the money goes actually from the state to the charter school to a community center, and each parent agrees to give like $500 a month towards this community center. It's called Oku.
I've
If I
never heard
remember
of
it correctly, this is the model, but it's basically like they're utilizing the homeschooling model through an independent study charter school, and then the community center and the charter school have an agreement that they're basically funding the community center. So going to your point of like, oh, but my kids won't get socialization, they actually do spend 2 or 3 days a week at this community center doing enrichment, which is really like where all the learning is. It's like art and dancing and music and creation, and but then they're still doing a couple days a week of actual like academic learning. So,
Right.
but again, the funding piece I really like, because I think the other thing we have to think about is really reimagining the business models, because right now the funding is very 20th century, top down, hierarchical, and people that the parents on the ground that are the most concerned about their kids don't usually have access to the funding. And so there's got to be ways to change that. So I like this as a model where you can get community organizations to work together to create a different version of school. And what I'm also hearing you say though is each family and each child has to really figure out what's best for them, for the child, for the parent. And some kids are going to have different within the same family, are going to have different needs, right?
Definitely. There's children, there's children that thrive in the current school system.
Yeah,
That's their temperament,
absolutely.
and they love it. And so
Yeah.
by all means, use it.
Yeah.
But not all children do that, right? And so I think it's a matter of really trying to find what works for your child, and and thinking outside the box. Like this week, I heard about, I guess it's something similar to what you're talking about. There's a school here. I think it's private though, not charter. That they're not going to open. Well, okay, so I don't know too much about it. So I don't know if this is just their model or if they're doing this because of COVID right now.
Yeah.
But basically, they're putting some of their teachers together with students. And so they're just going to be teaching them individually in like small groups, and the parents will pay the school and will be registered as a student of the school.
Interesting.
Right. So I found another family that have decided to just come together, a group of them. One of them has a property with lots of acres and horses and chickens and gardens and a pool. And so they're just going to, and these children are really young, so they're just going to create a space for them to all come there. They're going to hire 2 teachers and an assistant between the families, and the families, the parents will also take turns coming in and volunteering. So there is right now room to just completely think outside of the box, change, do a hybrid of some virtual and then some unschooling, in the sense that you're just going to do your core subjects online, and then you're going to create space to do something else that interests your child. I think it's very important that we also realize when we're enrolling our kids in these programs, what are their expectations of us? Are they going to be bombarding our kids with work and assignments? And we have to be able to advocate for our children. And this goes back to also kind of being the black sheep, right? Like this time is really calling us to analyze our values. And to intentionally live in them. And that may mean telling, I know you guys did this in one of the interviews. I heard you talking about this, in telling your teacher or school, this is not serving my child, and I am not going to ask them to do this. Right. And
I want to say that really clearly, because people like you and me feel really confident saying that because we're trained educators and we've done the conscious parenting. So we're like, we know that, and it comes from an intuitive place of like deep knowing. So we can just say it. But I hear from parents all the time, especially the moms that I talk to, that are like, oh, I can't say no to the teacher, or I really don't want to disrespect the institution. Or even one of my friends who's quite bold in saying no to the institution, she was even really struggling with like, well, do I just do homework once a week, or do I, so I've been saying to people, like you said, that it's okay to either just say no, or to say like, wait, what am I doing? Because for us, I would say we've talked about homeschooling for a long time, but we've always been too scared to do it or too worried about us not having our jobs because that's our identity. It's like we work jobs and we produce money. And so we really struggled. But with COVID, we're like, oh, now we did we manifest this? Because we've been wanting to do it for so long and now it's just right in front of us. But it's really scary. And so this is the opportunity to say like, oh, the things I might have been wanting to try. Like I've been encouraging people, if you don't want to do, I talked to a mom who's in a really high kind of performing district. And she's like, oh, if I try and do the pod schooling, teachers, I'm the principal and everyone's going to be expecting like 6 to 8 hours of academic work each day. So why would I do pod schooling? I might as well just do distance learning or whatever. And I was like, well, then maybe you should just leave that school. Like maybe, like you said, it's a time to question your values and say, why haven't you left that school to date? Ask yourself that question. Because if you're telling me you don't agree with 8 hours of academic work in distance learning, do you agree with it for third graders or second graders in the regular school day? The answer is probably no, but something's holding you back from actually really going through with, again, swimming against the current. So but now's the time to just like try it out, like try different things and see what works best for you and your family, right?
Yeah, and a lot of that goes back to our own, upbringing in an authoritarian environment, right? I had a lot of work to do around not putting my child's teacher the way I did as a child, right, on a pedestal, and questioning them, right, and that questioning of authority that is really ingrained in a lot of us, right? That fear and that disrespect that we're showing if we question, and then really realizing if they can't hear you and they can't, because it will happen, it may happen, but that some are just going to say, no, this is it. And if you don't like it, hit the road, and that's okay.
And that's a choice point for you too, right?
That's not the place for you. And that's a choice you have to make for your family. But this is really a time for us to do our work, become courageous, advocate for our children, and just really dig into what are our values. And I'm not knocking the school systems or the teachers. Teachers are doing the best that they can, and a lot of them feel stuck themselves in the system.
Yeah, and you and I know it's an incredibly difficult job, and I always tell everybody you should be a waiter and you should be a teacher, and maybe a janitor at some point, because you really need to get in and understand some of these jobs that we don't respect. And it's like being a teacher is the hardest job I ever had. And I've been a CEO and I've been this and I've been that. I've had really stressful jobs, but that was the hardest job. Trying to get 27, 15-year-olds to sit down and learn about world history. This is the best and most difficult job I ever had in my whole entire life. So no bashing of teachers. You and I are not into bashing teachers. This is not about that.
No, definitely not. But this is our time. This is our time to grow as human beings.
Yes.
And to grow as parents, and to question all systems.
Yes.
And all institutions.
Yes.
And really check into what are our values, and are we living them intentionally, or are we just being herded along?
Yes.
And just doing things out of our conditioning and our habits.
Yes.
Without really putting forth much. And I get it. It's easier.
It's easier.
Right? It's easier. And we fall into those ruts without even recognizing it, right?
Yeah.
So I get it. I've been there. I've done that. And even with all the work I've done, inner work that I've done on myself, I'm still there at times, It's not trying to get to any specific point. It's the journey. And then, one of the reasons that I did the Coaching Institute and completely changed, I had a job and left, and was to model to my kids, because they could see that I wasn't happy. And so I didn't want to be a hypocrite and tell them, yeah, follow your
Right.
passion and do what you love. But here I am, you know,
Slogging through the
just
day.
right, and complaining
And
and
they're smart.
upset,
Yeah,
and they pick up, they
they feel it.
know, right?
Yeah.
They feel it, and so, and we're not very good at hiding it a lot of times. You know, so sometimes it's not just picking up, like they see it.
And even if we
um
were good at hiding it, they feel it. It's
they
energy. They're all
exactly
about the energy. So when you come
right.
home depleted, you don't think they don't know that? Like, yeah,
Right. And so that was part of my reasoning, was to
that's
model
beautiful.
for them
Yeah,
that just because I went to school for this, I started this, okay, it didn't work. I didn't like it. I didn't
yeah,
enjoy it the way I thought I
yeah,
was going to.
yeah.
And now I'm moving on. Is it scary? Of course.
It's
But
very
you go
scary.
through it anyway. And you keep going.
Yeah,
And you trust and you flow, and it's still a journey for me to stay in that flow and
yeah,
recognize it'll
yeah,
come, right? It'll
yeah,
come, it's coming, just flow, just stay open.
yeah,
And I think that those are the beautiful lessons that we can model for our kids right now.
yeah. And what you're talking about, which I can say with like 100% universal truth, is that the universe is progressive and this change is happening for a reason. And there's multiple institutions and things that we're like, we're being asked a question. And until we actually kind of evolve in the way we're supposed to, the universe is precise. There's going to continue to be other things that come to say like, okay, you're still doing the antiquated school system. You're still parenting with these command and control models. You're still like, your kids are ready for something totally different. So are you ready to wake up? Are you ready to wake up? And I think it's just a really great time to try the different things. And that's literally why I'm starting Heart of the Matter, because well, it started now. It's not, I used to say starting, now it started.
It
It's been going on
started.
for a few months. But the reason I wanted to launch it is because those are the downloads I'm getting, is that, this is going to keep happening until we start to really reevaluate our values, like you said, like really ask ourselves. And in some of the conversations in the Facebook group, we were talking about different parents that were thinking about this. And I just asked Sherry McKay, asked her, what's the vision you kind of just have for your daughter? She has a 7th or 8th grade daughter. And once she was able to get herself in that space of like, what's the vision and the values for my daughter, then I think she was able to kind of see that it wasn't as difficult as she thought to get her into a space where, so they ended up going with like an independent study and hiring a tutor and bringing in animals and different, I can't remember all the details, but basically they were able to find a way forward. And so I always remind people, the mind is the jungle and it's going to go to, there's only one way. And the one way is, I thought the kids would be going back in August. My life is really difficult right now because the kids are here all day, every day. So they're supposed to go back to school. Well, they're not for most states, at least not right now. So then it's like, what are the infinite possibilities for how we can learn and educate our kids? And like you said, everything's impermanent. So you
And
could disconnect the system a little bit.
our children are here to wake us up. Like,
Yes.
they're much more awake than we are,
Yes.
until they become conditioned. But
Yeah.
and I see it more and more. I see it through my children, and I see it through the children that I was working with,
Yeah.
2 to 4 year olds,
Yeah.
up until last year. And I see it, like
Yeah.
if we would just stop and listen
Yes.
and
Yes.
really, really absorb. Like, that's one thing I have learned, is that when my kids say something, even if I get triggered at first, which I've gotten
Yeah.
better with, but I
Yeah.
just stop and listen and say, wait,
Yeah.
what is that really telling me?
Mm.
Right? Instead of getting defensive, which is,
Yeah.
I'm not perfect. It happens too, right? Which
Oh,
is
yeah.
really easy, and
Yeah.
in our autopilot, especially if we're stressed.
Yeah.
But just, you'll find a beautiful lesson if you just stop and listen. I'll never forget the other day, I was telling my son, well, did you prepare this and that and have it all ready? Because he had to go take something somewhere. Like, he had
Yeah.
to take his work to show, at school, this for the end of the year, they
Is
set
he
up like
17 or 14?
he's the 14-year-old.
14.
They
Okay.
set up a presentation, a table with the work of all the kids, and parents came
Oh
in.
yeah, like a
one,
presentation or
yeah, one at a time with
yeah.
because of COVID to see it, because they were 8th graders, so they were graduating.
Ah, okay.
And I was like, and did you grab this? And he said, Mom, you're worrying about something that's going to happen 2 days from now.
He's using the teachings against you. I love it when they do that.
Right.
He's like, didn't you teach me this? Be in the
And
now. You just said this on this interview.
And I was like, you're right. That's all I said. You're right. You're absolutely right. Forget it. And then we got there. It goes even deeper. Then we got there. I see, we went in one family at a time to help our kids set up their presentation, their table, their area. And he brought maybe 3 things. And there were many other students from his class already had set up their areas, and they had like all this stuff. I was like, oh, but look, you had this and you didn't bring it yours. And you made one of these, but you didn't bring. And then I said, wait, luckily I caught myself. I don't even think I said it. I think it was all in my head. Right. And then I said, stop.
Yeah.
He's satisfied with what he brought, and he's satisfied with what he created. He doesn't need to show it off for validation. Isn't that the more beautiful lesson here?
Yes.
And I was, and I was able to just talk myself off the ledge and be like, okay, this is a bigger lesson. And then there was another parent that walked in, and she was exactly saying the same thing. And I was like, oh, come here, let me tell you what I just went through.
Yes.
And she was like, oh, I was like, so that's why that came. It was a message for her that came through me, is the way I look at it, right?
Yes.
But I had to experience it first to be able to offer it to her.
Yes.
So yeah.
That's such a beautiful story. And I remember Dr. Shefali was really on a roll for a while when COVID first, really when we started to close everything down. And she was saying, I want you guys to really look at yourselves as a generation of parents, like in their 40s, 35 to 45, 50, this age group that has co-created this mess. Like, we do have a system and a society around our kids right now that is really, stop blaming your kids, like go within and see how you co-created the mess. And I know from working with teenagers and parents and now, so I've actually done the K through 12 spectrum. So I've seen, I've never done preschool like you have, but I've seen this whole spectrum. And what I've seen is that we've created a system or a society where we're always trying to save our kids. We don't want them getting hurt. We don't want them scratching their, we don't want them riding their bikes by themselves. Like, Utah had to pass a law, a free range parenting law, just to let the kids walk down the street because they were warning police if they were walking. I mean, the article is extreme. I'm sure it wasn't quite this bad, but it was like 7 and 9-year-old boy and girl walking 2 blocks to the elementary school, and the neighbors were calling the police by themselves because they were by themselves. And so they had to actually pass a law. And I'm like, it's happening to us if we have to pass laws to say that our kids can walk 2 blocks down in a very nice suburban Utah neighborhood. There was no reason. Anyway, so I think that what you're talking about is that kind of savior mentality, and with that specific example with your son is that you were the witness observer, which takes a lot of work on yourself to see that you are going to bring your conditioning into that moment and want him to be the perfect kid or this and that and all this external stuff. And that is, it's a beautiful story. And I think that's the shift that if we don't think the universe is trying to wake us up right now with all these all the pandemics, I'm calling them all the pandemics, then we really need to kind of go within and ask ourselves, where are we co-creating this?
Definitely. It's an inside job. I really believe we create our own safety and freedom inside.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then
our kids reflect that, right?
Everything we do on the external, it matters, of course, and we have to take others into consideration. Yeah. But if we're feeling free and safe within, then we know that we're doing that, even if it goes against our grain.
Yeah.
For someone else, out of our love and compassion for them.
Yes.
But it doesn't define who I am.
No.
Or what I believe, or right. I'm free inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that you brought up pain, because in my call last night with my I have a membership community, and we had a call last night.
Oh yeah, please
And
put that in the comments and stuff. Anything that you're running right now, so that people can look. Just so I don't forget to tell you that later. But go ahead. Yeah.
thank you. So I usually choose a card from Dr. Shafali's deck of cards
Oh,
that she
nice.
has
Yeah.
that I love.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I just randomly, or not so randomly, but I choose one and I read it and we have a discussion around it. And the card last night was something, I don't have it with me right now, but it was something
Yeah.
to the effect of pain is pivotal for our child to learn resilience.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
so if we can have that mindset right now, right, that
Yes.
pain is a good thing because it's what we grow from,
Yes.
as scary and as hard as it is. And that's how our children learn resilience. But if we
Yeah.
try to save them from
Yeah.
it, then they don't have that opportunity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I always say pain is not optional, but suffering is,
Yes.
right? And so I think that that falls in there too. Learning how to feel the pain
Mm-hmm.
without falling into the suffering
Yes.
and looking at it as resilience
Yes.
and modeling that for our kids.
Yeah.
And they're
So
watching us
beautiful.
right now.
Oh, every second of every day. And to your point, my wife and I, right before this, I was rushing around because I had a school meeting until 12:30, Pacific. So I was like, oh, I was rushing. And then my daughter said, Mommy, she's 7, almost 7. I don't want you to work anymore. And I was like, oh, I think that was talking about me. Yeah, it was both of us. She's like, I don't want both of you guys running around working all the time, because I was not present. I was like thinking about this call, and I was running from the last call, and then I was like, oh, okay, just spend 5 minutes with her. But what she was really saying is like what you were saying is, I don't want you guys to go back to the grind, the rat race, where you're disconnected from us. You're disconnected from yourself. You're not in presence. And she's highly intuitive, highly empathic, and she's like, I don't like you guys when you're like that. I like you much, because my wife just quit her job a month ago, maybe not even a month ago, 2 weeks. And something has completely shifted within her to where she's so much more present. And my daughter can feel that. And so going back to the fear that we talked about, whether it's quitting the job or changing the kid's school or moving your house or whatever it may be that your soul is calling you to do, but you're worried about it, that's where our kids will know. And like you said, you quit your job because you wanted your dog to model for your kids. And it's like, that's where the tug, if you're not following the tug, just think about when you look in your kids' eyes and they're like, we want you to be your authentic self. We want you to be free, because we do too, right? That's what the kids are saying. It's beautiful.
Definitely, definitely. And the homeschooling and all that, it doesn't have to be super expensive.
Yeah.
If you have the means to stay home, and I think that's one of the things that businesses have to reevaluate right now, is how they
Yes.
employ parents,
Yes.
and
It's
what
got to
that's going to
change.
look like, right?
Yep.
That's got to change, especially if you
Yep.
have young children.
Yep.
And so just realizing that homeschooling doesn't have to be expensive.
No.
It doesn't have to take all day.
No.
If you have any flexibility with your job and the
And you don't have to do it alone, right?
home, and you don't have to do it alone. I mean,
like you can bring in grandma and neighbors, and I mean,
tutors, high school kids, college kids, right? Whatever you feel safe doing in the situation, but definitely get the support that you need. And even if you decide to go the virtual route, just take what works for you, and have a conversation at least around what doesn't. You will never know what could happen if you don't have the conversation, as hard as it is.
Right.
And so, and I think it's also very important as parents to remember that going in to have the conversation as a team player with an open heart.
Yes.
And not as an attack of, you're making my child do this and I'm going to defend my child, right? That's not what I'm talking about. That's not going to get you very far.
No.
Right? So just going in calmly and having a conversation about, this is what my child needs. This is what I'm
Yeah.
seeing my child need. How can we work together
Work together. Yep.
to make this happen for my child so they could thrive?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Okay. So just if you're a mom or a dad that's working right now, that's watching right now, that might want to just wonder like, okay, what's the advice? Like, what would you give them? Before you do that though, so while you're thinking about it, I'm going to just name off some of the terms and things and I actually think maybe we'll do a little blog post on Heart of the Matter that just kind of lays them all out. But so unschooling, we talked about briefly. It's really, from my summary, I haven't read the book and I've read a lot of different things about it, but is that you're kind of checking the status quo, checking the mainstream, and really connecting and attuning to your child. So it's very in line with conscious parenting. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
And
Offering an opportunity to learn through all different
yes.
activities.
Yes. Okay.
And life experiences.
Right. Okay. So that's one, and that's usually combined with some version of homeschooling because you're not putting them into an institution, right?
Yeah, and I was going to mention this earlier and I forgot. The Sudbury schools.
Oh yeah.
Which are also called democracy schools, is the closest kind of building that you're going to find for something like this.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard about them too. Okay. We'll put those in between the two of us, we can put them in the comments. Okay. And then homeschooling, we've talked about, but I think the messages around homeschooling, and I'm going to bring on more homeschooling parents because I want them to keep sharing this, but is that you don't have to do it alone. It's not 24/7 all day, every day by yourself with your child. The socializing can happen. And during COVID, it's a little more challenging, but out of COVID, it's not that challenging at all. You just figure out a way to find other families and socialize and get them in activities and all that. And there's different versions of homeschooling in terms of maybe going through a more standardized curriculum through a charter school or an independent study or doing something that's more like no curriculum and just kind of going through it on your own. Like I said, we'll do more on the homeschooling. I just wanted to give just a co-ops. Yeah. And co-ops part of the homeschooling, like you can work with other organizations, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been involved in one. I've only heard of them. So I know that there are co-ops where you can, they'll offer classes for working parents where you can drop off and then they can take different classes. It's not going to be 6 hours.
Oh, yes.
Right? Okay. It's going to be a couple of hours. Yeah. And then, I mean, there's so many different ways you can do it if you're thinking outside of the box, because you can partner up with another family and say, okay, well, I have to work these days. Can you kind of take the kids back and forth on these days and I'll do these, so it's really getting outside of the way
and working together, right? And working in community, because one of the other things I was going to bring up is the pod schools that are kind of becoming this phenomenon recently around getting together with a few other families and maybe doing the distance learning through the school, which is like online or whatever, through your school you're enrolled in. And then I'm seeing a lot of people saying like that's really perpetuating the equity issues of like, the haves and the have-nots. But I actually think there is a way to do this where it's not about spending tons of money on a teacher, but just leveraging the community and having a way to share raising the child through a village. And it's not like you have to have tons of money. You could do bartering, you could do exchanging, whoever the best person in the community is to teach about sewing or whatever, and then somebody else teaches them how to cook. And there could be all this learning that happens without having to pay $50,000 for a certified teacher. Because I know a lot of more affluent families are doing that. And I'm seeing these articles about how this is really going to create even more of a, divide in our society in terms of resources. So it doesn't have to be, there's just, like you said, there's so many, just in the basic of the material world, there's so many possibilities. But when you get into like infinite possibilities of the fact the universe is asking you to do this, there's infinite possibilities. But even if you're not on the spiritual path, there are 100 or 500 possibilities straight up just from being creative, without even saying that, there's a bigger picture that's keeping you here.
Yeah. And I think it's very important also, I haven't mentioned this, but I also think it's very important that, especially if your child is, I would say maybe 9 and up, involve them in the decision making. Like you do your research, right? And you pick 2 or 3 options.
Yes.
Keeping your child in mind always, right? So, and then sit down, have that conversation with them and ask them, given these 2 or 3 options, which one, do you think you would most enjoy? Or
Mhm.
combination of them, right? Like sometimes they think outside of the box so much better than
Yeah.
us, right? So
Yeah,
they may
for
think of
sure.
something that we didn't even think of.
Hmm.
Um, so really try to involve them. Like my kids want to go back to their high school. They're just
Yeah.
going to do it virtual
Yeah.
until, and I don't blame them. My daughter's a
Yeah.
senior.
That's what they
My
want. Yeah.
daughter's a freshman. My son is a freshman. He
Yeah.
wants to see
They
what
want that
it's
high school
like,
experience. Yeah.
so we'll see. But I know in my mind, this is again, like, we'll see.
Exactly. It's
We'll
impermanent.
see.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so what is the kind of closing advice you'd have? I do think a lot of parents are in this position right now in this moment where they're asking themselves either like what they should do because the school's closed, or they've always kind of been thinking about doing something differently and they're asking themselves what they should do. But like, what advice would you have for them kind of on closing note?
Yeah, I think it goes back to really, first of all, bringing yourself off that ledge and calming yourself down so you
Yeah.
can really think it through
Yep.
and educate yourself as to what are all the different options.
Yep.
And then, and which ones align with your child and your family values.
Yes.
And then, you know, find the courage to go for it,
Yes.
knowing it may only be for a month.
Right.
You may try it for a month and be like, this is not for us.
Yeah.
And then you try
Exactly.
something else. Like this is the
Yes.
perfect time to do
Yes.
that right now. Right.
Absolutely.
Especially if you were in the spring, your child was not thriving virtually, and that's the only option your child's school is offering right now.
Yep.
Why are you going to do that to yourself again and to them?
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
If you already have the, again, it was very short term, it was like 2 or 3 months or whatever it was for most of us. You have the evidence, you
Exactly.
know, and maybe it'll get a little bit better because the schools are getting a little more, getting more used to it, but you kind of know what it's going to be. So now's the time. That's the other advice. Now's the time.
Now's the
Now's the
time.
time. Now's the time. Everything's impermanent. Ask yourself if you're stuck in fear or what's kind of, what like you said before. So much
Yeah.
great advice.
And just listen to the beginning of this again, sit
Yeah.
with it, take notes, and remind
Yes.
yourself, constantly remind yourself, no matter what is going on the outside, I'm safe.
Yep.
I can do this.
Yep.
And come at it with that energy, because your children will feel it
Yes.
if you're unraveling.
Yes.
And they're going to have a hard time with anything you choose if you're doing it out of fear.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
it's your job to get clear.
Yep.
It's your job to see what you need, what they need, and how you can create that environment, and then bring them into the conversation.
Yes.
But it's an inside job.
Yeah. Just trust your intuition. Just trust it each step of the way.
It's the time to be a warrior.
Yes. Well, Barbie, thank you so much. I knew we had to get together and talk, and I loved every second of it. You showed up so beautiful and so calm and just centered, and I think people are going to really enjoy this interview. Thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing how this all expands.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thanks, Barbie. Take care.
Alrighty. You too.